northern England later on in the day. So for most of us, temperatures in the high teens at best, possibly scraping 20 or 21 degrees in the far southeast. Saturday, there's little in the way of change. We've still got this rain lingering across eastern coasts of northern England and parts of Scotland. And once again, we could see some fairly heavy showers breaking out across parts of Wales and southwestern England. But in any sunshine, it will feel quite warm over the weekend, particularly as we head towards Sunday, when I think it will be a bit of a drier day and we could see temperatures climbing into the low 20s.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Summer could be a scorcher, with your chance to win £30,000 cash, our biggest cash prize to date. It's totally tax-free, which means you get to spend every single penny however you like. What plans would you make with an extra £30,000 cash in your bank account? Take your family on the ultimate holiday, buy that treat that's always seemed out of reach, or just put it in the bank for a later date. However you'd spend it, make sure you don't miss out. For another chance to win £30,000 in tax-free cash, text cash to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries cost £2. Or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
As time passes,
She could have saved Storm. You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere.
something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. The Labour government is well underway with its net zero agenda. As Ed Miliband orders an immediate ban on new drilling in the North Sea. The only interest this serves is overseas dictators. GB News' political editor, Christopher Hope, sat down with the Prime Minister today, and he discussed everything from relations with Europe to overhauling the planning system. GB News' polling has revealed which Tory leader voters would like to see for the next election. Can you guess who it might be? Plus, for those of you who were watching when the result of my count was announced last week, you may recall a man wearing a baked bean mask. Mr. Barmy Brunch, he joins me live in the studio. State of the Nation starts now. I'll be joined by my panel, Labour activist Susie Stride and Daily Telegraph columnist Madeline Grant. As ever, I want to hear your views. Send them in, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's what you've all been waiting for, the News Bulletin with Sam Francis.
Jacob, thank you very much, and good evening to you. It's just after 8 o'clock, and the top story tonight is that police are still waiting to speak to Carl Clifford in connection with the murders of 3 members of the same family. He is currently in a serious condition in hospital. The 26-year-old was found near a cemetery in North London yesterday after a major manhunt. Earlier in Enfield, police were seen retrieving what appeared to be 2 hard drives and bags of documents from a house connected to their investigation. A crossbow is also understood to have been recovered as part of their search. Well, Carl Clifford is wanted for the deaths of Carol Hunt, the wife of BBC commentator John Hunt, and 2 of their daughters. In Bristol, a taxi has been seized as part of another urgent manhunt after 2 suitcases containing human remains were found on the city's Clifton Suspension Bridge. Officers have now released a description of their main suspect, who'd travelled to the bridge by taxi last night and left the luggage. If you're watching on television, you can see there the pictures of that suspect. He has a beard, he's dressed in black and wearing a backpack. Officers were called last night to reports of the man acting suspiciously, caught on CCTV. They now say they're urgently working to find him. The bridge does now remain closed while specialist investigators scour the scene, and an investigation is underway to identify the remains. Double child killer Colin Pitchfork's next parole hearing will no longer be held in public. That's after new allegations have emerged. He was jailed for life for the rape and murder of 2 15-year-old girls in Leicester in the 80s. The hearing was due to take place this week, but has been adjourned with the parole board saying there have been fresh, relatively recent allegations relating to the risk that he poses. In other news, the Prime Minister has brushed off concerns that his plans to release prisoners early to ease overcrowded jails would see a crime wave unleashed across the country. His new government is proposing to free inmates after serving just 40% of sentences. It's expected Sir Keir Starmer will authorise the emergency measures this week, but it comes after he said he was shocked at the levels of overcrowding in prisons, admitting it was worse than he first thought. And Joe Biden is due to hold a rare news conference later tonight as the US president's attempting to calm doubts about his age and his ability to win the race to the White House. Political commentators say tonight's address is the kind of event he needs to pull off if he's to hold on to support after a shaky debate performance against his rival Donald Trump. Yesterday, he lost the backing of another Hollywood actor, George Clooney. But after meeting Joe Biden at the NATO summit, Sir Keir Starmer, the new Prime Minister, thinks the president's on top form.
He was on good form, and we covered
4 more years, no problem.
Well, look, he was on very good form, and I was very pleased to have that opportunity to discuss these issues with him, and not least this question of our special relationship, which is very important to him, very important to me, and very important to our 2 countries.
And one last story for you. Water companies in England and Wales say that planned bill rises won't be enough to tackle sewage spills. The regulator Ofwat has approved annual average increases of £19 per household, but that's a third less than water firms had requested. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sam Francis. Another update for you at 9 o'clock.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. The sound of a Scottish oil rig being demolished just a few weeks ago, and also the sound of the Labour Party destroying the UK's energy independence. We can now look forward to lining the pockets of overseas dictators, tens of thousands of British jobs disintegrating, and increasing energy bills for the British people. Today, former Labour leader Ed Miliband, now Energy Secretary, ordered an immediate ban on new North Sea drilling for oil and gas, a decision that gets to the heart of the net zero fallacy. In the UK, we love to boast about the fact that we have cut carbon emissions by more than half since 1990. The Tories have been nearly as culpable in this foolishness as the Labour Party and Green lobby more broadly. And while we've cut emissions significantly, we have primarily done so by passing our emissions to foreign countries at the expense of our industry and energy security. This has hit the economy, economic growth and jobs. Quick search on the National Grid dashboard shows over a third of our energy is imported, the majority of which comes from fossil fuels. In other words, we have given the appearance of cutting emissions so we can give ourselves a pat on the back, while global emissions are hardly affected. It's difficult to believe that as recently as the 1990s, the UK was a net exporter of energy, we were energy independent, but now we are net importers. And this will only get worse under Labour and its fanatical plans to ban drilling. Today's decision represents a boost to overseas dictators who will take full advantage of our reliance on their oil and gas reserves. Have we not learned the lessons of Russia's invasion of Ukraine? The UK, along with Denmark and Germany, has the most expensive electricity bills in the world. And what we all have in common is a strong reliance on unreliable green energy. As a result, we have sluggish growth. Meanwhile, the US, China and India, which are all growing much faster, have cheap energy. And all of these economies are willing to use fossil fuels. One of the great failures of successive Conservative governments was not to roll back the green agenda. As a result, we have paved the way for Labour to set in stone a destiny of high energy bills, deindustrialisation, the loss of jobs and energy insecurity. We should not be banning drilling in the North Sea, rather we should start fracking onshore to improve the wealth of the nation. As ever, let me know your views, mailmog@gbnews.com. But I'm delighted to be joined now by Tim Crossland, environmental lawyer and campaigner for Defend Our Juries. Well, on Defend Our Juries, I think I agree with you completely, but that unfortunately is not what we're talking about today. We've got these resources. We're going to be using oil and gas for the foreseeable future. Doesn't it just make sense to use ours rather than other people's?
I'd just like to start with a point of agreement, because I like points of agreement. And one thing you said I do completely agree with, which is this idea that the UK has decoupled economic growth from carbon emissions is a fallacy. As you say, global emissions continue to rise. The reality is the UK is a service sector economy, so we import a lot of embedded carbon from China and elsewhere, and that's the real story. So there's a real deception in that narrative. And I also agree, if you look at the evidence, if you look at global economic growth since 1750 and the start of the Industrial Revolution, it goes up more or less in lockstep with carbon emissions. So just applying sort of common sense to that, the thought that we can slash carbon emissions without any impact on economic growth looks implausible. I mean, it's still 80% of the base energy of the global economy. So I think people are right to look at that and to consider the implications. There is another side, which is just as you see carbon emissions and economic growth going up in lockstep, if you look at the evidence, you also see global temperature going up in lockstep with carbon emissions too. And the sad and sometimes painful thing is that both of those are true. And It's very rare to have a conversation where both of those things are being acknowledged. What tends to happen is one side focuses on one side of the equation, the other on the other, because none of us really want to admit we can't see a way out.
Is there a way out? You see, I wonder if a technological solution, which we've found before, if you think of the evolution of energy policy, our cheap energy started with burning wood, then we found coal, then we found oil, then we used gas more effectively. Each one in turn slightly cleaner than the one before, slightly more environmentally friendly, in many ways with gas, even less carbon emitting. We've got technological investigations going on. We've got the possibility of fusion. I think hydrogen, green hydrogen, is potentially very interesting as you use the excess of renewables to produce hydrogen when the electricity otherwise wouldn't be used. Isn't that the way to go, and to allow this to happen in an evolutionary way rather than with simply banning things and saying no?
Well, it might be, but again, taking an evidence-based approach to this, what most scientists will say, including the Committee on Climate Change, is yes, of course, technology is part of this, and the evolution of technology is part of it. But looking at the pace of change that's required, the idea that technology just comes to our rescue is a little bit of wishful thinking.
But the pace of change that is required is never going to happen for a number of reasons. First of all, other countries, particularly the poorest countries, aren't going to do it. That if you're India and China, with huge populations, you cannot risk saying to them, we're going to make the poor even poorer. And in democratic countries, it's a pretty difficult platform to stand on to say, I'm going to make you less well off than you've been before. So we can't meet that pace. Therefore, we have to rely on technology and to some extent amelioration, don't we? We have to do things that make the consequences of changing climate less devastating?
Well, of course, but again, we need to ask the question whether that is going to be enough. And just looking at the scale of crop loss in this country as a result of the flooding, this is a wicked problem. It intersects with other things that are happening in Ukraine, and Ukraine, one of the bread baskets of the world. At the same time, India faces massive heat crisis, which reduces its wheat crop. And you see all of these things intersecting, and actually it looks like we're going to end up with collapsing economic growth, partly because of the consequences of global heating.
Do we? Because that's the bit that I think is the most contentious, is allocating individual events to the consequences of climate change and saying, I mean, where the Somerset Levels flooded, and that was 10 years ago or so, that was really because the drains hadn't been dredged, and the drains were built by Dutch engineers in the 18th century, and the water had flowed out, and as a matter of environmental policy, they stopped dredging them, and then you have devastating floods. And that there are things that happen as a result of weather events that have always happened, and it's trying to determine which is which.
Well, there's a multiplicity of causes for any sort of major natural event, and you can always point to other factors, and, the draining could have been better, and the forestry could have been better. But I do believe most people, scientists or not, if they're really honest with themselves about what we're witnessing, not just in this country, but globally, can see that there is something else. There is a trend that is changing, that is discernible, that we can more or less see outside of the window. And the other part of it, being more scientific about it, is this was predicted as long ago as the 60s, though largely concealed by the fossil fuel companies whose research identified this, a long, long time ago. So what we can now do is look at the scientific models as they were back in the 60s and 70s and see actually what's happening maps onto that.
But some parts of the world, if they have a longer growing season because it's slightly warmer, actually benefit. So it's not all doom and gloom. There are some advantages of a slightly warmer climate.
Well, yeah, it's possible to say, isn't it, that certain parts of Russia or Canada, maybe they will be able to grow things they wouldn't otherwise grow. But given the complexity of our global economy, the sort of things that are being predicted now, even if that is true, the net effect is going to be catastrophic.
All right, well, I will allow you the last word on this occasion. Thank you so much for coming in. I think we have some of the best conversations on this topic, which normally provide more heat than light and probably
really
a good deal of carbon dioxide. So thank you
Jacob.
very much, Tim. Coming up, we'll be having a look at GB News political editor Christopher Hope's interview with the Prime Minister, including what he had to say about closer ties with the European Union. Plus, we'll be hearing from the interesting fellow who appeared next to me at my vote count last week.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Meghan Markle has reportedly finished filming her new show for Netflix. It aims to celebrate the joys of cooking, gardening, entertaining and friendship.
Yeah, this comes after Prince Harry's Netflix documentary, The Heart of Invictus, failed to hit the right note with viewers missing out on the top 10 in the streaming charts.
So, will this next venture be a success? Well, joining us now is royal commentator Kinsey Schofield.
I know I've talked to the both of you about Meghan Markle potentially running for president, so this feels like a bit of a dud to go from Meghan Markle running for president to Meghan Markle's Netflix series about friendship and cooking. So she's wrapped this recent show. They rented a home near hers in Montecito, so that as their cooking set. And they're saying that this is really make or break for Harry and Meghan when it comes to their Netflix contract.
You think, Kinsey, it's fair to say that Meghan Markle has proved to be commercially a bit of a damp squib? Even in America, her native homeland, she's kind of Oprah without the audience when it comes to the cooking. Also, is she kind of, do you think... They saw her as the golden ticket, didn't they, to unlimited revenue, unlimited audiences, and it just hasn't happened.
Look, I think Meghan is a beautiful woman, and I do think she's talented, but I think how you treat people is incredibly important. And not only was she rumored to have been cruel inside Kensington Palace with several bullying allegations, but here in the States, Archwell Productions, their audio section, their scripted section, they've gone through several employees. And I think it's a reflection on the way that people are treated there. And I think as a viewer, you might get that. You might feel that way. And maybe that is where the appeal has been lost.
GB News, the People's Channel. Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled. Lovely.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome back. We were talking about North Sea oil drilling and the green agenda. And Rob says, I totally agree that we should not be rushing headlong into this scrapping of all our own power resources. However, I definitely disagree with you about fracking. Any people who have not experienced the earthquakes in Blackpool, like I have, would want to continue with fracking. Well, we must come back to the earthquakes. Sam says, I think Miliband is just wanting to make big decisions early with this new government to continue this getting to work immediately motive the Labour Party currently has. Very interesting to see what happens. I will just say that I disagree with Ed Miliband on almost everything. He is one of the most charming politicians you could hope to meet. That sometimes happens. It's very frustrating. You disagree with people, then you discover they couldn't be nicer. Anyway, this week's NATO summit marked the 75th anniversary of the establishment of the most successful military alliance in history. While I'm sceptical of many international institutions, NATO has proved to be the most successful of them all, and the summit is a reminder that it was this alliance that won the Cold War. Perhaps more importantly, however, it is the alliance that should win us Cold War II. In an age where the Russia-China-Iran axis looks even more threatening to the Western world, we find ourselves in a constant state of proxy wars combined with mutually assured financial and military destruction. The Prime Minister and President Biden met yesterday, where the President told Sakir that he wanted to see him bring the UK closer to Europe. GB News' political editor, Christopher Hope, sat down with the new Prime Minister earlier today.
Do you think perhaps getting closer to the European Union could help the special relationship?
Well, I've been clear with international leaders here that we do want to reset the relationship with each of the individual countries, whether they're EU or not, but more broadly. And of course, you know, this being a NATO summit, NATO is the cornerstone of our defence in Europe, and you know, working with our European allies on defence has never been more important than it is at the moment.
You saw Joe Biden close to.
Yeah.
George Clooney thinks he shouldn't serve 4 more years as president. What do you think? Has he got up to the job?
I was with him on a bilateral for, well, it was going to be 45 minutes. It ended up being the best part of an hour. Right. We went through a number of issues at pace, strategic issues that I was keen, and he was keen that we you know, thrash out and talk through. He was on good form. Yeah. And we covered
4 more years,
ground.
no problem?
Well, look, he was on very good form, and I was very pleased to have that opportunity to discuss these issues with him.
Just looking at home, you're about to start releasing criminals early from prison. Do you know how many might be released? And what would you say to victims' families if any of those individuals commit crimes again?
Well, look, I'm shocked to be in this position, if I'm honest, particularly having worked in criminal justice. It is a basic function of government that there should be enough prison places for the number of people that the courts are sending to prison.
If they re-offend, it's on you, Keir Starmer.
Well, look, I can't build a prison in 7 days with the best will in the world. It is clearly a problem left by the last government. There's no issue about that. You cannot be in this terrible state. And they ignored the problem, didn't fix the problem.
Just a final one, an easy one. Football, you'll be there in Berlin on Sunday, won't you?
Yes.
If football doesn't come home, will you resign?
No, but look, I mean, This is a brilliant team. I've always, notwithstanding some of the early games, I've always believed in this team. I think they're very good. I have been to these finals before. I went to the last one. I'm hoping that with this team we can bring it home. But look, I think a whole country will be willing them on when it gets to Sunday.
Well, I'm joined now by my panel, Labour activist Susie Stride and Daily Telegraph columnist Madeline Grant. Susie, he's on good form. Do you think that is Sir Keir's way of saying that poor old Joe Biden's passed it but didn't want to tell a direct lie?
No, I don't think so. I think that's the, you know, from that conversation he had, that's the impression he got, and I think that's fair enough.
But isn't on very good form what you say about an elderly aunt who's lost her marbles? You don't say it about the leader of the free world.
No, someone might ask me, oh, how was it tonight? And I might say Jacob was on good form. No, I think it's fine.
Well,
the England team were on good form.
all right. Madeline, what do you think? I thought that was very tactful.
I think he was very diplomatic. He handled that question very well. I mean, the truth is that the president is in serious cognitive decline. It's been obvious for a while, and recently, in the last few months and weeks, it's become far too obvious to be ignored, and there is already a very serious discussion happening within democratic circles about what on earth they do and if it's possible to get rid of him at this stage. So no, Keir Starmer handled it very diplomatically, but the truth is that the president has not been on good form for some time.
And should we be worried, therefore, about NATO? Because it was a NATO summit, and the linchpin of NATO is the United States. The Commander-in-Chief of the United States is the president.
Yes.
If he's not up to it, that's a problem for all of us.
It is a very worrying thing. And I almost worry about also, you know, if Joe Biden, for some time, it hasn't felt like he's really in charge, which is quite an alarming prospect, the idea that the person who was elected for this role is not able to fulfil it, therefore, who's filling it. And, you know, surrounding Joe Biden are many capable and intelligent people who you presume are running the show in his absence. So, you know, it's not all entirely lost, but it is a very worrying thing to have to imagine. And also, how on earth did a country as great as America end up with the options of Trump and Biden at the next election?
It's a very, very good question. But on NATO, clearly Sir Keir wants to do something also with the European Union and build another security network. What's the purpose of that?
I mean, I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not sure if I know about that. You might have to expand a little bit more, but yeah, go.
I'm just curious as to why that would be necessary. Is it actually that Labour is really keen to have some sort of subsidiary arrangement with the EU? It's about rebuilding some form of EU alliance.
I mean, look, I think there's a lot of fear from some people about, like, us resetting the relationship with Europe, and my answer to that is we want that relationship to be as best as it can be, and I think that's all that's happening here. You know, we want to build good relationship there. We want to have, you know, good trade agreements there. I don't think there needs to be all this fear about it and what's going on here. Is there some sort of secret agenda? No, there's not a secret agenda. It's the wise thing to do. We want to build good relationships with Europe.
You'd all quite like to be back in the EU, really, wouldn't you? You never wanted to leave, and Sir Keir was a great advocate of a second referendum. And so people are right to be a little bit nervous about the intention.
I think, look, I'm very big on democracy, and ultimately there was a vote, and the vote said an answer, and I think actually we have moved on from there. I think where we're at now is, for the British people, which I'm sure we can all agree on, we want always the best deal. And so those relationships, you know, you were just saying about Ed Miliband. I know Ed Miliband really well. You guys, two different parties, but, you know, there's a respect. And I think building that respect, having a good relationship is really important. Do I think we're going back to where we were before? I actually would say we are never going back to where we were before. So if that reassures you, if that reassures other people...
Does it reassure you?
No, I think Susie makes a really, really good point there. And also I think it's in Labour's interest not to open up that old wound, because obviously, although the big headline from the general election was that the Conservatives got absolutely pulverised, and I'm very sad to say, but there are many seats where reform were massively eating into the Labour vote too. There are a great many even Labour frontbenchers who only narrowly won in 2019 because the Brexit Party, they didn't have... the Brexit Party took so many votes away. People like Yvette Cooper and Bridget Phillipson held on by a whisker. So I'm not sure it's in their best interest. I'm slightly curious about what is it that they think they can get from Europe that goes further, because, as I understood it, Rishi Sunak had gone some way towards resetting the relationship. You know, he did seem to have more harmonious relations with the EU than his predecessors did. And then we had things like the Windsor Framework, you know, whatever you think of that. So I'd be very interested to know what, in terms of actual meat, beyond just everyone being nice to each other, is meant by this.
And the first problem for Sir Keir, the opening up of the prisons. Now, the Tories were about to do something broadly similar. Why aren't we building enough prisons, and why does it cost £600,000 for a single prison cell? There must be something wrong with this.
I mean, I don't know. Everything that we try to build in this country is fraught with difficulty. It takes years for, you know, planning permission. I think that there's probably a great deal of permits and the same problems that have beset things like HS2. I wouldn't be surprised if that besets just about everything that we ever try to build ever. But honestly, I don't know the answer to that. I know that we have a serious problem with delivering almost anything on any scale. But the fact is that Keir Starmer may blame the Tories, and he's probably right to blame the Tories, but the fact is, once you're in charge, you do get blamed for things that happened on your watch. When Cameron and Osborne took power, they inherited a terrible economy, but that didn't stop them for obviously being blamed for austerity and any cuts to local services. You know, the left didn't really care that, you know, this was a decision that had been, you know, basically forced on them by the state of the economy that they inherited. You know, that's just politics, isn't it?
And Susie, do you think the problem is we can't build enough prisons and that this is part of the whole planning reform agenda that is so central, or that we send too many people to prison and we need to look at how we're sentencing people and the guidelines and the high level of prisoners we have compared to other countries?
I mean, this is actually an area I'm really interested in. I did a research project on it, and I think there's a bigger picture here that if we invest in better alternative education, if you invest in sport in communities, music in communities, mentors, knife crime straight away is going to come down in this country if we begin to invest in those areas. There's a whole lot of things we used to do, youth inclusion programmes back in 2007 under the last Labour government when I was just out of university, and we literally saw crime come down in areas like the police force would say, go to this area, we'd do that work and crime would come down. And so it's not rocket science. And I think there's a bigger picture here where there are people that do need to go to prison, and those people need to go to prison. And there are people that actually there's so much work we can do on preventative work, and actually I really hope that Labour are going to do that. Those things cost money, mentors cost money, sport in the community costs money. I'm a big fan of modern day philanthropy. I'm always like, where can we get money from other places? But I think the exciting and hopeful thing is the future doesn't need to look like the way it looks at the moment, and there's a lot of crime we can bring down. There's a lot of spaces in prisons that actually can be released, as it were, for those what they call the hyper criminals. Let's go after the hyper-criminals.
Let's go after the hyper-criminals. You heard it here first. Well, thank you to my panel. Coming up, the GB News polling is in. But can you guess who the people would like to see as the next Tory leader? And don't forget, we will be hearing from one of my fellow candidates last week in North East Somerset and Hannam. Mr. Palm.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. It looks like it'll be a pretty cloudy day for most of us on Friday. There's a risk of some very heavy showers across the southwest as well. Now, for most of us, high pressure is building in just for a time for the end of the week and into the start of the weekend. That means it will turn that much drier through the next few days, but there's still a risk of some showers. And through this evening, I think central areas are most likely to see the cloudiest skies and a risk of some rain through this evening. Also, some areas of rain might move into the far southeast from the near continent. Where skies remain clear, though, to the north, across parts of Scotland, it could be a bit of a fresh start down into the lower single figures by tomorrow morning. But for most of us, a fairly mild start. But as I said, sunshine is going to be a little bit limited through Friday. A northerly wind drags cloud in, perhaps some more heavy rain to the far northwest of Scotland throughout Friday morning. Some sunny spells, though, coming through for Northern Ireland, southwestern areas of Scotland. Also some areas of northeastern England as well, but here we've got a northerly wind, and that's going to keep the temperatures down through the day. And as I said, there is a risk of showers across the south coast throughout the day, particularly as we head into the afternoon into the southwest. We could see some thundery, heavy downpours. But for most of us elsewhere, it should stay dry through Friday. Quite a lot of cloud around, though, so with that lack of sunshine, it's not going to be a particularly warm feeling day. And we could see some heavier rain move into the east coast of northern England later on in the day. So for most of us, temperatures in the high teens at best, possibly scraping 20 or 21 degrees in the far southeast. Saturday, there's little in the way of change. We've still got this rain lingering across eastern coasts of northern England and parts of Scotland. And once again, we could see some fairly heavy showers breaking out across parts of Wales and southwestern England. But in any sunshine, it will feel quite warm over the weekend, particularly as we head towards Sunday, when I think it will be a bit of a drier day and we could see temperatures climbing into the low 20s.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
The 12th, a day to celebrate history, community and family here in Northern Ireland. Join me, Arlene Foster.
And me, Dougie Beattie, as we bring you live coverage of the July 12th celebrations from the beautiful city of Belfast.
And right across the United Kingdom. It's all happening here on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Oh, welcome back. We were talking about the interview with Sir Keir Starmer that Christopher Hope had exclusively for GB News. And the mail logs have come in. Richard says, the EU still risks a banking crisis. Let us not be drawn in. And John says, Jacob, if we deported the foreign prisoners, that would empty a lot of cells. That, I think, is a very fair point. The race to take over the Tory party is set to dominate political headlines for the coming weeks. Yeah, I'm not sure about that, actually. I think it may dominate Tory headlines for coming weeks as people think more broadly with a new set in Downing Street. Nonetheless, members and the public alike will give their opinion on who can bring the Conservative Party back to health and win back those voters who have been left behind. Today's People's Polling, conducted for GB News, the People's Channel, of Tory leader preferences from 2019 Conservative voters who moved elsewhere in 2024, have some interesting results. Leading by a huge margin is somebody you may have heard of, one Mr Nigel Farage on 25%, followed by Boris Johnson on 11%, Suella Braverman on 8%, and tied at 4th and 5th place on 4%, Kemi Badenoch and, interestingly, David Cameron. Ex-Tories who left for Reform say by far they want Nigel Farage, and then in distant second, Boris Johnson. Ex-Tories who left by Labour say they want Boris Johnson or David Cameron tied first, and then Nigel. Now, I've not been unsympathetic to a Farage-Johnson ticket to lead the right, so do these new data make this a potentially winning opinion? I'm joined now by former Conservative MP Michael Brown, as well as my panel, Labour activist Susie Stride and Daily Telegraph columnist Madeline Grant. Michael, thank you for coming in. Do you think that this poll is useful or that it's too backward-looking?
No, I think it's a waste of time. The first candidate you mentioned, Nigel Farage, is not going to be standing in this leadership election or any time soon. I don't think he will ever join the Conservative Party. He regards it, as I'm afraid I do, as a complete freak show. The next Conservative Prime Minister, if there ever is one, on the basis of 1997, is not yet even in the House of Commons. Just as when I entered the House of Commons in 1979, the next Labour Prime Minister, 18 years later, was not in the House of Commons when I got elected. And on the basis of 1997, we've got 4 leaders to go through before we ever get to a contender for the Tory premiership. So you discount him. Boris is not a member of Parliament, so he can't stand. Cameron is a member of the House of Lords, so he can't stand. We've then got Braverman on 8%. I added up in this poll. I'm not suggesting that the poll figures are wrong, but what I am saying is this. If you add up the don't knows 19%, somebody else 6%, none of the above 14%, add into that Farage is 25%, Boris is 11%, and Cameron's 4%. 75% of the people who voted as they did, it isn't going to happen. So it's going to be a freak show between Braverman, Badenoch, Tugendhat, Patel, and by the way, I read just a few minutes before I came into the studio that Mel Stride is being urged to stand as well. I'd never heard of Mel Stride until he popped up on the Today programme every other day 4 weeks ago, but apparently he's been a cabinet minister for the last year or two.
So what you're basically saying is that this is a waste of time and energy and that the Conservative Party needs to calm down. Because actually, who takes over at this point?
I have a terrible confession to make. I don't think, I'm 73, I don't think that I will live to see another Conservative government, even if I live, and I'm spared by the good Lord to live to 83 or 93. On the basis of last time round, we waited 13 years, so that takes me to 86, and I probably won't be here because I drink too much and smoke too much. So I think it's a complete waste of time. And why would Nigel Farage, who I know reasonably well, I supported the Brexit Party to get rid of Theresa May, and I have to confess that I did not vote for the Conservative candidate in Westminster. Only 2,000 of us voted for reform here. I did vote for reform, and I see no reason why I should change my vote at the next election once this freak show has played out over the next 4 years.
Well, that's pretty robust.
Blimey.
Come on, Madeline.
Well, what do you want from me?
Well, do you think Nigel could ever become leader of the Conservative Party, if not at this round of voting and the next one? Does that reunite the right, or is he simply too divisive a figure?
Well, I mean, I just think that every opportunity he gets, he says that his raison d'etre, his entire modus operandi, is to destroy the Conservative Party. You know, this could present at something of a problem if he's committed to destroying the political party.
But to rebuild, he wants to destroy to rebuild, because he wants to be...
No, he wants to replace it. He wants, you know, his party to be the new party of the right. You know, he doesn't want the new Tory party to rise from the ashes like a glorious phoenix. He wants to destroy them. And if you talk to Reform Party people behind the scenes, I remember well into the run-up to the general election, before it even looked likely that they would win a single seat, they would tell you, we are here to destroy the Conservative Party. How do you unite a party with someone with a... You know, it's like it's a cooker in the nest. You know, how could you possibly...
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Madeline. I can see no circumstances, certainly not in this forthcoming Parliament, where Nigel Farage has anything to gain by throwing in his lot with a party that is still yet further to fall apart.
So, Susie, you're grinning from ear to ear because you're the cat who's got the cream, haven't you? You're going to be in office forever.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question. Like, you're asking me who do I think should be the leader? I mean, I want the person that's least likely to win over the British public. I'm honest with you.
Well, I'd say all
I'm going to be honest.
All of the candidates you've read out
of these candidates, I mean, I've met James Cleverly, and he came across just as this has been his foreign secretary. He's a really nice guy. I know people that also have worked with him that just say he's a really good guy. So when I look at this list, I think actually the person that possibly has the most integrity there, that's got because I'm really big on integrity and conviction. For me, I look and I think, oh, maybe James Cleverly. Robert Jenrick, because of the whole West Bay Printworks, I live on the Isle of Dogs and I'm not a fan of what went on there.
He got 1%.
All that dodginess. I hope that he never gets anywhere near the leader of the Conservative Party. But I do believe in democracy, and I do believe that it's good to have, you know, what happened in the Labour Party was a disaster when we had Corbyn, and so I do hope that you find someone that can unite the Conservative Party. I'm not sure who that is out of these.
But it's broader than that, isn't it, Madeline? That it needs to unite the whole Conservative family with reform, and it could be that Nigel can unite the right. I think that's unlikely, or it could be one of these candidates. But as long as there are two parties of the right and not proportional representation, which I think would be a bad idea, we cannot win elections.
Yeah. But the trouble is that if the Conservative Party becomes the kind of Reform Party only, they may well recoup some of the seats that they lost, but will that be enough to get any kind of majority under first past the post? You know, there are all these seats. For example, my parents live near Stratford-upon-Avon. My mother and I used to make jokes about what would the Conservative candidate have to do to lose in Stratford-upon-Avon. You know, it would be things like be caught on camera happy slapping the Queen, you know. And, of course, it's now a Lib Dem seat. You need someone that can win in market towns, who can win in rectories, who can also win...
And by the way, we make the mistake of thinking that Nigel's vote only came from Tories like me. He also polled very heavily in the northern old-fashioned red wall that the Conservative Party totally threw in the wastepaper bin. Yeah. And he won't want to sacrifice... He's gunning for the Labour Party, by the way, as well, especially in the areas that I used to represent, like Scunthorpe and
the Labour Party's gunning for him, but the reality is that he's broadly of the right, and that people who vote for him would otherwise be more likely to vote Conservative.
Don't be deceived that Nigel does mean what he says, and Nigel, in my view, is the most consequential politician without ever being near the House of Commons of the 21st century. Now he's in the House of Commons. You know, we'll see how it goes, but I will not be voting for Nigel if he throws his lot in with the Tory party, I can assure you, and therefore I won't be voting Conservative next time either.
It's a very good point. How do you, if you're a big chunk of your appeal is being completely anti-establishment. If you throw your lot in with the oldest political, until recently, most successful political party in British history, what does that say?
But Boris led the Conservative Party as an anti-establishment figure, so it must be possible to do.
Yes.
And Disraeli led the Tory Party an anti-establishment figure.
Well, I think the main thing, actually, the one thing we're not talking about here, I agree, conviction is important. Having a platform that can win over all of these disillusioned Tories of different stripes, very important. But just being seen to be competent, very important too. People are fed up with things not working and, you know, basic functions of the state not working. And often that fits into a sense, for example, immigration, I think, is a vitally important issue that the Tories need to get a grip on. But that does feed into the sense of incompetence, because if it puts pressure on housing, if it puts pressure on the NHS,
I do just wonder whether there's a bigger picture here, that you guys need to find who you are as a party. Like, you know, where have you come from? What are you about? What is the vision? Because these little things, whether it's immigration or like that's not the vision. What's the vision that you guys have of the future of this country? Because I think that's, you know, it can't come from these people.
Jacob,
does that make sense?
I can't give you any more time, but thank you very much. We need to show what our values are. Thank you to my panel. Coming up, the moment you've all been waiting for, sound of drum rolls. Monster raving loony party candidate for North East Somerset and Hanham, Barmy Brunch, is waiting in the wings for a GB News exclusive interview.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
No one wants their child to be a fussy eater. But what is the secret to expanding your child's culinary horizons?
Is there a way to get kids away from the kids' menu, the fish fingers, the chips? Joining us now is the UK's top-selling author of children's cookery books, Annabelle Carmel. Good morning, Annabelle.
Thank you, so lovely to be here.
So, first of all, what's the issue with kids just having the traditional easy meals like fish fingers, you know, chips, beans?
It really depends if they've got preservatives in them, if they're full of salt. So I like to make them myself, and it's really easy. So I make my own chicken glazed nuggets, and super easy to make using proper pieces of chicken. You can cook them in the air fryer now, which is absolutely brilliant, so you need to fry them. And I think that it's really important that children grow up loving good food, because they make their minds up by the age of 5 what they like and what they don't like, and it's quite difficult to change their minds after that. But it's good to know that fussy eating is genetic. It's not to do with your cooking.
Oh,
that's not to say that you can't do something about it. So I've written many, many books, and I have an app with 1,000 recipes on it, and a lot of how to make your own junk food, how to make your own isolis out of fresh fruit.
Yes.
How to make your own pizzas. I make the most amazing homemade pizza. I actually brought you some cookies here.
So these are your books here. So my first cookbook, that's for how old children?
That's from the age of 1.
OK, and you've got a weaning one at the end, the baby one?
Yes, that's my very first book. I lost my first child. It was really sad. She died at the age of 3 months. And my second child was the world's worst eater. And I wrote that book as my legacy to Natasha, never thinking that it would start a whole career.
Oh, bless you.
It sold millions of copies, and it's so popular.
Is it quite pivotal and important that you introduce kids to the weaning stage, or, you know, how important?
It's very important, because the processed weaning food in pouches or jars, it's heated, so a lot of the vitamins aren't there anymore, so making your own is so easy and much cheaper.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. Are you comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister?
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained. I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
As time passes, she could have saved Storm.
You made my argument for me.
My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
It went everywhere. Something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different. Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, we've just been talking about the GB News exclusive polling on the Tory leadership and Michael Brown's view that it didn't really matter much anyway. But Sam says close to 0% chance of electoral victory with Kemi, Braverman, Patel, Johnson, Cameron. Far better chance with Tugendhat as leader, with Farage and, more importantly, his contract taxation pledges brought on board as a recruiting sergeant. Well, that's very interesting. And David says, trouble is the church is so broad, many would welcome Jeremy Corbyn. So broad they stand for nothing. The Conservative name is toxic, associated with uselessness and corruption, infighting and parties. While Barry says, the sun is shining on Somerset. I can see the wonderful Somerset coast from my living room in the famous town of Barry. Well, I'm delighted to hear it's so nice in Somerset. An intrinsic characteristic of British political culture is satire, defined as the use of humour, irony or exaggeration, particularly in the context of contemporary politics. The ability to parody and ridicule a democratic system is evidence that it's both democratic and robust. For centuries, British politics has been satirised in various media. Late 18th century cartoons of Rowlandson and Gilray, the Punch cartoons of the 19th and 20th century, Charles Dickens' Pickwick Papers, parliamentary sketch writing and spitting image. But one of the most visible and consistent forms of satire was the fielding of novelty candidates in elections, most famously, of course, the monster raving loony party. One such loon went viral for standing next to me at my count early this month, wearing a balaclava imprinted with a full English breakfast. Well, who better to join me to discuss the prevalence of parody candidates in British politics than my fellow candidate in North East Somerset and Hanham, Barmy Brunch.
Good evening.
Mr. Brunch, or may I call you Barmy?
Well, you choose, whatever you like. I think looking at that election night, it was a very interesting night, wasn't it? And I think I had one sausage too many, just looking at my body. I think that's just... There we are, it is what it is. I need to run a bit more.
And have you stood for election before?
No, never before. So this was the first time. A nascent politician, and who knows? The Portillo Moment Party may continue. But
and did you enjoy it?
I thought it was a great night. Did you enjoy it?
Oh, I loved it, yeah, but I enjoy elections. But
it was a late one.
Did you knock on doors and...
Yes.
I got your election leaflet, so you used the Royal Mail delivery.
That's right. So every potential candidate gets that. You just have to have it printed. So I sorted with my mother one Saturday and Sunday the 74,000 that were needed, and the Royal Mail, of course, deliver it. So yes, you can see it on the screen. That's the that was the manifesto. Well, yes, you got it. So you got it in your because your and I real addresses were actually in the published.
That interested me. We were the only two candidates who were willing to admit to our voters where we actually lived.
The bravery is what it was, because I think there's a few that just have offices in that constituency and work mostly in London.
And sort of pretend.
Yes, exactly.
It surprises me people aren't more willing to put their address. I don't buy the whole security thing because...
Well, I did have to attend a briefing. Did you have to... Were you at one of the ones that I was at?
No, I don't think I was.
No, the briefing of sort of being aware of the public confrontation, and there was a bit of surprise walking around in this when I did the campaign, but...
But no confrontation. People are very friendly,
It was mostly friendly, yes.
And people take it in the spirit it's intended.
They did.
And so, your name, Barmy Brunch.
That's it.
Have you changed your name by deed poll?
Well, I did that 10 years ago, so I've lived a long and checkered life, mostly working now as a teacher, so it works quite nicely representing Barmy Brunch, because no one knows who I am, other than, of course, the school that I had to get approval from, but none of the students know, so if you're watching, who knows?
Have the students not worked it out?
Well, there's rumblings. There's rumblings, but there's not much more than rumblings. And when they sort of... Because, of course, I've just come from work, and this is my standard. The body is recognisable. Obviously, I don't
go around in the... You're not using any voice...
No, there's none of that bin-face nonsense,
But I seem to remember when the News Bunny stood for Parliament, there was some press reporting that the News Bunny got into trouble for something and was almost charged with an offence. And if he had been charged, this poor man would have had to have kept the name the News Bunny for years before he was able to change back to being called John Smith or whatever his name was.
Goodness me. So, yes, no, fortunately, I'm a free man. I can essentially change my name back. You said to me just in the sort of the out cue, take the mask off. Well, the mask is staying on for now.
Right, you're going to remain in You're really like Batman, so very few people will know who's the real...
That's right, it's a sort of naff Batman, a sort of keep the mask in the pocket. It was in my pocket all day, as I say, I come from work.
And had you won, what policies were you going to be putting forward?
Statutory brunch hour, 11 till 12. That was the first thing. That was the only thing. But, I mean, you know, we call it bantocracy, I can see that. But there was a serious message, because I think that the mental health system in this country is broken. I have a sister who's suffered from quite severe mental health issues, and the way in which she's been treated is appalling. And I just think that part of the message behind the mask is to really take stock and think, OK, this is the state of where we are. This is the state of the nation. Let's look. Let's try and change. If I can bring a smile to someone's face, great. If people take it as a joke, great. But really, let's look at our mental health.
And there is a serious purpose to the novelty parties, that you are trying to hold British politics up to be examined, to be ridiculed, to make it be better.
I think so. And I think that's a really valuable part of the British democracy system. You couldn't do this in Russia, but you can do this here. Interestingly enough, Salisbury very close to where but certainly not. So, yeah, I think it's something that is to be celebrated in British politics. I think it was taken very well. You all gave me, including some of your family, gave me a very warm reception. And I will come round for brunch.
Well, I don't, yes. But I had a very funny conversation because Peter said to me that you'd said I'd invited you to lunch, and you said to me that Peter had invited you to lunch. You played it brilliantly.
Well, is the invitation still solid?
Of course it is.
Oh,
yes, yes. Well, but Peter and I do talk to each other. And I said to him, Barmy said you'd invite him to brunch, and he said no. He told me you did.
Either way, what are we going to have for our brunch? That's what I want to know.
Well, we obviously have Somerset eggs and Somerset bacon and Somerset sausages and Somerset potatoes.
Some of it's got to be vegetarian. I actually don't eat meat. So that's the other thing. That's the other thing. And one Somerset journalist said, do you know, that's the best line of the night? And I was thinking, goodness, the stakes are not so high for comedy in this area.
A full English breakfast without any meat.
That's it. Because, of course, now you have all these sort of vegan sausages and all this sort of... got a friend who's producing animal meat and some website and in the lab and stuff.
Are you vegan?
No, not vegan. I do eat Somerset eggs. We can have some of those.
Have some eggs and toast. Fried bread?
Yeah, I do that. Can do that. I mean, you can look at me. I mean, I'm not someone who lives a particularly healthy lifestyle. I saw myself come in and I thought, goodness me, it's sports day tomorrow at my school, so I will be running in one of the races. Probably not in this mask.
Right, we had sports day for my children's school yesterday, and fortunately they don't make the parents do anything. So that was a great relief, because I'd have come last. I'd have lost that as well as the election. But tempted to do it again?
I actually would think about it. And I think, you know, I got to get Michael Portillo's permission, but because I feel like every Portillo moment, not that yours was, because the classic thing with the Portillo moment that everyone's saying in the press is you have to know, you know that you're probably going to lose your seat, but the public don't. Whereas obviously there was a lot, and you even said on the night, you know, you can't speak for, but you sort of gave an indication.
I knew. My team had done the tally, and I knew I was a long way behind by 11:30, which makes the night pass more smoothly. Anyway, we've got to go, unfortunately, but thank you very much to Mr. Brunch, my new friend Barmy. Now, before we go to the break, overnight, I've been compared to an American dynasty about whom I know remarkably little, the Kardashians. I prefer the Addams family comparison, although I hope we are neither kooky nor ooky. The idea that our house is a museum is not entirely unappealing, so I look forward to welcoming you all to watch my wife, the Moglets, and me on your screens in this new invention of colour television. Anyway, up next is Patrick Christie's. Patrick, what's on your bill of fare this evening? Any kooky or spooky things?
I'd just like to thank you for one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen, Jacob. Back to back, actually. I was going to interview that guy and I thought, well, I've been there and I've done that note, fine, whatever. Anyway, Ed Miliband, is he a dangerous eco-loon? I'm going to be talking about that. What will it take for the Labour Party to wake up and realise that there is a problem with extremism in this country and they help create it? Sir Graham Brady is on to talk about the future of the Tory party, and we've got some evidence that appears to indicate a school is indoctrinating kids with critical race theory.
Oh, excellent. All very exciting. That's all coming up after the weather. Tomorrow I'm going to be at Lord's watching the cricket, where I think England could win, in case you've been paying attention to football rather than cricket. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation. The weather in Somerset this weekend is going to make you come out with jealousy wherever else you are. If you're not in Somerset, you're missing a treat.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. It looks like it'll be a pretty cloudy day for most of us on Friday. There's a risk of some very heavy showers across the southwest as well. Now, for most of us, high pressure is building in just for a time for the end of the week and into the start of the weekend. That means it will turn that much drier through the next few days, but there's still a risk of some showers. And through this evening, I think central areas are most likely to see the cloudiest skies and a risk of some rain through this evening. Also, some areas of rain might move into the far southeast from the near continent. Where skies remain clear, though, to the north, across parts of Scotland, it could be a bit of a fresh start down into the lower single figures by tomorrow morning. But for most of us, a fairly mild start. But as I said, sunshine is going to be a little bit limited through Friday. A northerly wind drags cloud in, perhaps some more heavy rain to the far northwest of Scotland throughout Friday morning. Some sunny spells, though, coming through for Northern Ireland, southwestern areas of Scotland. Also, some areas of northeastern England as well, but here we've got a northerly wind and that's going to keep the temperatures down through the day. And as I said, there is a risk of showers across the south coast throughout the day, particularly as we head into the afternoon into the southwest. We could see some thundery, heavy downpours. But for most of us elsewhere, it should stay dry through Friday. Quite a lot of cloud around